Welcome, coffee enthusiasts and legal eagles, to another delightful episode of LexDiscuss Café. I'm your host, Avi, and today we are brewing up a special blend of legal insights, golf anecdotes, and maybe even a dash of hazelnut-flavored contracts. Our guest needs no introduction. He was working as a Senior Corporate Counsel at EquityZen, and now he's working as a trusted C-suite advisor and outside counsel. Please give a warm cafe welcome to Jim Day. As usual, this will be a two-part series because I forgot to record the second part. Jim, thanks a lot for coming on the podcast. For our listeners who don't know anything about you, who don't know what kind of amazing background that you have had so far, do you want to give a brief introduction to themselves?
Sure. I feel really lucky that to this point in my career, I've been able to associate with organizations that are solving what I think are really interesting and important problems and are doing things that are bigger than I am. And that was the thing. So my career to this point is basically broken down into three, maybe four major categories. I started off as a military officer, having gone to the Naval Academy. And from there, after doing a JD MBA at Georgetown, transitioned into private law practice in large law firms. From there, went in-house at EquityZen. And now I have my own law firm where I'm sort of doing a hybrid private practice and in-house work, where part of what I do is either an outsourced general counsel or an outsourced senior corporate counsel, typically for large, highly regulated technology companies and industries like SaaS, healthcare, transportation, some blockchain and anti-fraud types of organizations. And the thing that I really have appreciated the most is that I've gotten to be a part at various points in my career of things that were in the news, things where I felt like I got to contribute to a bigger organizational objective than just my own career advancement. So I got to participate in one of the most successful counter-narcotics operations that the U.S. Navy had ever launched in private practice. I worked on the financing of what is now a very large, publicly traded electric automotive company, represented the trustee in the Madoff litigation, and companies that I have been privileged to have represented since then are also, I think, doing a lot of really interesting and important work. So I currently have clients solving problems like how to make workflows more efficient so that the workers can organize their workflows more efficiently, collaborate with one another better than email typically provides. Another client that is solving some really important problems in transportation and transportation technology so that people can better leverage the resources of their local communities and transportation access won't be a barrier for them. And so that's really been the primary aim of my career, is just to align myself with people that I think are doing interesting things.
Wow. Thanks for that context. And that's what brings me to the next question. With such a successful career so far, what inspired you to start Claritas Law?
The main incentive for starting Claritas was I think that the legal industry is undergoing a rapid transformation right now, where it is becoming easier and easier for costs to be lowered by sending work down to highly skilled attorneys who can operate with very little overhead and still produce work product that is as good or sometimes better than can be produced by much larger law firms and organizations. I think there's a real need in the marketplace for experienced attorneys that have multidisciplinary backgrounds to act not just as an extension of corporations and to help companies fill unexpected gaps in their labor force, but also to provide general consulting type of advice where they bring their experiences and their multidisciplinary approach across a variety of industries to help those companies implement best practices, particularly in the area of commercial contracting, but also in regulatory analysis and general corporate work as well. And so I am taking advantage of that need right now. And as I mentioned earlier, I've been fortunate to work with some really great clients.
Your answer kind of inspired me to ask a little controversial questions, because Earlier, you were a corporate attorney and now you are an external counsel. Who do you think is more important for a company?
I don't think it's either is more important than the other. They both have important roles to play. I look at it more as different types of problems need different types of tools. So it's kind of tools in a toolkit, if you will. So certainly for very complex at the company types of matters, whether it's a litigation or a transaction, you're going to want an outside law firm for that with a deep bench that has done that thing as many times before as possible and can provide immediate top of mind advice as to what works, what doesn't, what's normal, what's not, and can really provide that perspective. However, for things that are part of the day-to-day operations of the business, and that doesn't necessarily mean simple problems, but things that come up more regularly and predictably, I think those types of challenges are best addressed either from full-time in-house counsel or from hybrid in-house counsel, such as myself, who are familiar with the business and can provide those services at a lower hourly rate.
Great answer there. So yeah, that brings me to the next question. You are a former senior attorney at EquityZen. Could you share some of the key challenges that you faced? And also, with the advent of generative AI, do you think this technology will help in some of those challenges?
Yeah. For those in the audience who aren't familiar with EquityZen, EquityZen is a fintech company that is focused on providing a marketplace for privately held shares of venture-backed technology companies. So they're really solving a few different important problems within the fintech and startup ecosystem. So employees of startups are typically compensated in equity. They need a way to trade that equity for cash to pay for large and small living expenses. At the same time, ordinary investors who usually aren't able to invest in privately held companies because of the way our securities laws are written usually don't have that ability to invest in that asset class. That's a problem because private growth equity has been one of the highest performing asset classes, even after accounting for the downturn that we recently experienced. On a risk-adjusted basis, it's one of the best performing asset classes that I believe more investors need access to. So an obvious way to solve for that would be to pair those investors with the employees who need to sell their equity. That's where EquityZen comes in. And at the same time, you have issuers, the companies that these employees work for, they need ways to attract and retain talent by awarding equity to their employees. And that value proposition to the employees isn't going to work as well if there's no way for those employees to sell their equity. So it's pretty rare that you run into a business like EquityZen that has this win-win-win dynamic going on. The reason EquityZen is producing such a big value is because these secondary market transactions are just complex enough to not really lend themselves to the same sort of highly automated trading that we see for publicly traded companies. Every company is just bespoke enough, has just enough variations in the way they've organized themselves in their corporate documents, their bylaws, their rights of first refusal. All the things that go into that vary from company to company just enough that it can't be fully automated. It needs a more of a specialized platform like an EquityZen to make these happen. So I think AI generally helps people get some of these more repetitive tasks done faster and also helps people zero in on the most important elements of the deal. And so I see technologies like this as helping to further accelerate these sorts of processes that are in some ways susceptible to automation, but not all the way. And that's where the generative part of generative AI comes in, because it's not just a pure if X, then Y. It's a predictive model that knows where the mean is across a variety of different transactions and can direct the participants in the deal to that faster. And so technologies like that do help companies like EquityZen that have, reg tech or a fintech element to them.
Thanks for such a great answer. Then my next question would be, you have been involved in various industries like fintech, e-commerce, and healthcare. How do you adapt your legal strategies to suit the specific needs and nuances of each industry?
Yeah, I'm not sure that the basic strategies really vary all that much from company to company. I mean, the core idea is that you start with a firm understanding of the overall business objectives of the client and look for ways that legal input and legal considerations can facilitate that. And at the same time, you're trying to uncover any blind spots that the business team might have missed or might not have anticipated. So that's always the basic exercise. But of course, from industry to industry, there's different regulatory regimes in place that you have to become aware of. So if at a fintech like EquityZen, you have to become familiar with the securities laws. At a healthcare company, you have to familiarize yourself with things like HIPAA or with how insurance regulations work. And really, beyond reading things like practical law to sort of get a basic understanding of how things work, it really just takes a lot of trial and error and experience and somebody willing to trust you enough to give you that initial opportunity to get a toehold and begin to learn. But once you've worked in enough different industries, you start to recognize patterns and you see that most businesses are more alike than different. All businesses need to make money. They need to sell a product or service for more than it costs them to produce it. And that's the basic concept that flows through to every contractual negotiation. And part of when I say more than it costs to produce it, you also have to account for the optionality of legal risk. And that's where lawyers like myself come in.
So my next question is, given your experience as a naval officer and military intelligence analyst, how has your military background influenced your approach to corporate law and deal making?
To corporate law, and what was the other element?
And deal making.
Different ways. I mean, I think the biggest thing that military did for me, when you're serving on a ship, you're there with 200 or 300 other people that in all likelihood you wouldn't have met, wouldn't have interacted with, but for the fact that you're serving in the military. And you're going to live with them in very close quarters for 6 months at a time. And they're going to become your family. And so that makes you adaptable to dealing with people with different types of personalities and makes you, I think, a better student of human nature, human motivation. And when you're in a negotiation and a deal, I think the most important principle of any negotiation is trying to move the conversation from talking about positions to talking about interests. So if I'm going through a contract and someone has a certain position that they want to take on a confidentiality clause, the best thing that I can do in that scenario is to find out what is it they're really interested in? What is the actual concern here? Are they just applying their corporate policy without really thinking about it? Or are they genuinely concerned that some important secret or trade secret of their business might leak out? And it's sort of that fine tuning to find what is the answer underneath the answer. What's the true motivation here? That was a skill that I first had to learn as a military officer, where I'm leading and managing people from every walk of life, every conceivable background. And when you've done that, you start to realize that people generally are more alike than they are different. Everyone has fears, they have motivations, they have dreams. And oftentimes in a negotiation, they tend to be very fear-driven. So you have to understand what is the underlying concern, or whoever it is that you're talking to. Are they afraid of looking bad in front of their boss? Do they want to save face? Are they genuinely concerned for what might happen if things go sideways? And just kind of getting that complete picture of the human element, I think, is something that machines will have a very hard time replacing. And that's where human lawyers can add the most value.
Wow, such a great answer. A lot of people don't know that you have been recognized by the World Economic Forum, and you actually received an award for innovation in wealth and investment management. What are your thoughts on implementing the latest developments in generative AI in the legal profession?
Well, I have to quickly correct you there. I didn't receive that award. EquityZen did, and I had a very small part in that. In fact, I think that award was given before I actually got to EquityZen, so I can't claim any credit for that. However, I was at EquityZen when they were fortunate enough to experience a very strong growth. I'd love to think that I at least had a small part in that. I was part of a team of 100 or so people that helped make that happen. And I think that when I think about generative AI in the legal profession, I don't think that it will ever replace lawyers or paralegals. I do think it will make it harder for them to profit from inefficiency, and it will increase expectations around how much these professionals can do or expected to do and at what level of accuracy. So I think the main value proposition of generative AI is to more quickly guide attorneys to areas where they can add the most value, like the human element of negotiations that I mentioned earlier. And usually, the human beings in contractual negotiation are adding the most value when they're making judgment calls, which are informed by their experiences, oftentimes outside of the law. So to whatever extent AI or machines or technology can minimize the resources applied to everything else, that's going to be a tremendous benefit to both attorneys and their clients. Personally, when I'm working on a legal project, let's say I'm drafting a contract or drafting a legal brief, the most difficult and time-consuming step for me is just creating that initial draft. So to whatever extent AI can get me through that first painful step the fastest, so I can begin to focus on the best way to communicate whatever it is I'm trying to say, that's going to be a huge help. It'll move things along a lot faster, and I think it'll produce better, less error-prone work product, which helps everyone.
Couldn't agree more. Would you like to share a particularly challenging legal case you have handled and the strategies employed to navigate it successfully?
Sure. I think while I was in one of my in-house roles, I was tasked with helping our product team refactor its whole payment system and the way funds flowed. And so that involved negotiating through a whole daisy chain of contracts, each with different privacy and indemnification requirements. And the thing that was really challenging about it was that it was something that was critical to the business, because it was the fundamental cash flows that were affecting the company and the number of different counterparties that were involved that weren't all necessarily talking to one another. So one of the skills that I've had to refine as I've practiced is sort of developing a sense as to how many people need to be involved at each different level of communication. So sometimes it makes sense to have an all hands call with every single stakeholder on it and every single party on it. And oftentimes the fastest way to get things done is through one-on-one communications, finding out who the actual pen holder is for a particular party, and just having a no-nonsense conversation with them about what their needs and interests are. So in terms of solving for that, it first involved getting a real firm understanding of how our product actually worked, why we were engaging in this exercise at all, and what were the legal risks involved. And then after that, it's really just sort of quarterbacking the deal and making sure that everyone who's involved has the information they need and the overall context behind why that information is being provided to them. And just through a lot of iteration, we eventually got through it.
Such a great story. So the next question is, in your role as a visiting professor in Mozambique, what lessons did you learn that have shaped your approach to advising startups and entrepreneurs?
So the opportunity in Mozambique was a function of having done an MBA at Georgetown University, which has a capstone project where the students are required to go to some other country and do a consulting project. And through that, I came into contact with the dean of a new MBA program that was getting started there. And he invited me to teach, which actually came as a bit of a surprise, but I leapt at the opportunity. And really, I went there and did the best I could to replicate a similar course that I had just taken at Georgetown. And the thing that I learned the most from that was I gained a new appreciation for the nuances of how different economic systems operate. So, for instance, Mozambique, like a lot of sub-Saharan African countries, you don't actually own the land. You have to lease it from the government in many instances. And that has implications for how the land is actually managed and used and taken care of. And so I feel like I learned a lot more from the students that I was teaching than I possibly could have imparted on them from trying to replicate this course that I had taken at Georgetown. But I did learn a lot about how different elements of the Mozambican tourism industry operates, their telecom industry. When I came back to the United States, again, that helps with my overall pattern recognition of what are the similarities and differences between how an economy like Mozambique operates versus what we have in the United States.
Wow. And there you have it, the first part of our conversation with Jim. Stay tuned and subscribe to our channel for the second part. Until the next legal adventure, this is Avi signing off. Stay caffeinated, stay curious, and keep those legal mugs refilled.